The USM process model is the result of almost a decade of field experience, and it's the key to simplifying service management for the enterprise. The USM process model has 5 processes that apply for all service providers and any service. The USM process model is the result of almost a decade of field experience and is the key to simplifying service management for the enterprise. The process model has 5 processes that apply for all services and any service provider. Now, sometimes rolling the improvement ball uphill feels like we're stuck in the mud, and it reminds me of the Japanese word MUDA. What we learned in techniques such as Lean Six Sigma was to eliminate waste. So when the Service Foundation re-architected USM almost a decade ago, they had this in mind. The USM process model is integral. This means the USM process model includes all service management activities. It's also integrated and non-redundant, which means each activity occurs only once. And last but not least, it's customer focused. All processes have a customer relevant output. The USM process model has applied the 10 criteria for process design as outlined in the ebook we identified earlier, demystifying the term process. A service management system is a logical and consistent set of organizational resources, and we use them to realize the goals of the service organization in an effective and efficient way. USM is a method that specifies a standard or generic management system for any service organization to manage its processes, its people, and its technology associated with their daily routines. USM provides us with a generic standard process model that's universal and applies to every service team or service organization. It's a key building block of the USM method. The benefits of standardization are clear, and we'll talk more about this when we get to USM and governance. But what we're going to do first is look at the USM process model, then we'll look at the standardized workflows that it enables. Once we've understood the standard process model and workflows, we'll talk about localizing them to any practice framework or organizational topology. The first process is about the first interaction between a customer and a provider. Before service is provided, the customer and the provider have to come to an agreement about the service. And this process applies to all service agreements, both with the customer and with a supplier or an internal solution team. Once we've agreed, we create a new service agreement or change an existing one. And these changes can relate to the facility and or to the support. But the change process is limited to things that we find really important, which USM calls the managed infrastructure. The things we consider important enough to register them in a database, what USM would call the managed infrastructure register, or what IDLE would call the CMDB, or a configuration management database. When a change is ready for operation, it has to be entered into the production environment. The operate process includes all the actions that are involved in the execution of the service from that point on. These are the predictable routine actions that have to be carried out every day to realize the facility for the customer. And it includes monitoring the performance of those facilities. Now, as long as things run according to our agreements, all we really do is operate. But if the service isn't delivered as agreed, the provider has to take action to recover from the failure. This can be done directly in production operations, or if a managed infrastructure component needs to be changed, we'd go through the change process first before realizing the fix in the operate process. All four of these processes can be triggered by or on behalf of the customer. These four are reactive processes. They're a response to an interaction with the customer. The only thing the provider has to do after all of this is to continuously improve the service. And this involves removing threats and realizing opportunities. So improve is a proactive process. All enterprises are faced with a constant trade-off between the attention given to threats and the attention given to opportunities. Providers have to balance both their needs, the customer's needs, and maybe even other stakeholder needs as well. In any case, improvement leads to the triggering of either a new or updated service agreement or a change that falls within the agreements made or an action in the production environment for which no change is needed. So we have four reactive processes that customers directly trigger and one proactive process that's triggered by the provider. You can call the triggers anything you want, really, but USM uses a wish to trigger the agree process, an RFC for a change, an incident for the recover process, and a service request for the operate process. Triggers for the improve process are risks, and these can be either positive opportunities or negative threats. This is the USM process model. Here's a decision tree for the process model. The first question we ask is whether this is one of the four customer-triggered processes, which are reactive, or is this a proactive trigger originating from the provider, which would go to improve, or what we would call risk management. If it's one of the reactive triggers, the next question is, does the agreement need to be changed? If so, we go to the agree or the contract management process. If not, then we need to decide if it's a failure or some other action is needed. A failure would trigger recover or incident management. And if an action is needed, all we need to know is whether we can take action immediately in operations or is a request for change needed, in which case we'd have to go through change management. The process model is key to enabling the USM workflows, and they comply with USM's process design criteria. The basic layout of USM processes show that similar activities happen at the beginning and end of every process. The differences lie in the body of each process, based on the nature of the process and its customer relevant purpose. And notice that for USM's change management process, it's the only process that administers the CMDB, or what, again, USM calls the Managed Infrastructure Register. Here's the standard process activities. And these can be grouped into logical activity sets and represented in the process model. The USM process activity sets show where one USM process triggers another. And this is what enables the creation of the USM workflows. Using the non-redundant USM process model, we can create 8 workflows that represent all activity of a service provider. Now, like the word process, the term workflow is used by people virtually everywhere and at any layer of the process hierarchy. USM defines a workflow as a logical series of consecutive activities composed of parts of the USM process model required to handle a call from initiation to completion. USM's service management architecture specifies a non-redundant process model with logically ordered activities in which only 8 workflows occur. So USM provides standardization at a process and workflow level and doesn't dictate who does what or how they do it. Let's take a quick look at the USM workflows. Workflow 1 is triggered by the customer and so is a reactive workflow. In this case, a customer submits a wish to modify the service agreement. The wish or contract management process would go through some activities and trigger change management, who would then go through change activities and trigger operations. When the operate process completes, it notifies change management, who performs its end of process steps, and then in turn notifies the wish or contract management process, who ends the workflow. Workflow 2 is also triggered by the customer, and so is also a reactive workflow. Now, this time, the customer submits a request for a change that's within the scope of the service agreement. Note that this means what the customer is asking to change is under change control, and so the Managed Infrastructure Register, or CMDB, will need to be updated. Once operation has executed the change, it notifies change management, who verifies the change, updates the CMDB, and closes the RFC. In workflow 3, the customer reports an incident, and the resolution is going to require an RFC. So again, whatever needs to be repaired or replaced is under change control. And in workflow 4, the customer reports an incident, but this time it can be resolved without requiring a change to the managed infrastructure. Workflow 5 is the simplest. In this case, the customer makes a request that doesn't require a change to either the managed infrastructure or a service agreement, and it's within the scope of the agreed service. This is a simple service request. The next 3 workflows are proactive. In workflow 6, the provider submits a wish to change the service agreement. The only difference with this and workflow 1 is that it begins and ends in the risk management or improve process, since it's proactive and originates with or is triggered by the service provider. Notice that workflow 7 is very similar to workflow 2, except it starts and ends in the risk management or improve process. Again, in this case, the provider's triggering the request for change. And in workflow 8, the provider submits a service request to operations. Again, same as workflow 5, except via risk management. It's initiated by the provider. Now, once a customer becomes familiar with the USM process model and workflows, they can use the USM workflow templates to adapt routines using any practice framework and any organizational structures. The Service Foundation provides USM users with free USM workflow templates based on the non-redundant process model. These identify what must happen for each of the 8 standard USM workflows based on the process model. Each USM workflow template is detailed to a sub-activity level of detail. These templates can be embedded in USM certified tool sets, but can be used by any tool provider or any tool that the customer wants. USM is an open knowledge product, and certification, while desirable, isn't a requirement. So the USM workflow templates provide us with what needs to happen at a generic level. So this much is already done for us. The profiles identify the tasks, authorities, and responsibilities of who have to do the activities. And this can include a RACI chart. What level of detail is needed will vary based on localized requirements. These requirements will basically involve the tasks to be done, the profiles who perform the tasks, and what degree of control your organization wants, which is based on the servants' agreements that you specify. Once we've combined the what with the who, we have a procedure. And we can add work instructions as needed, which tell us how to do the tasks. Now, how detailed the work instructions need to be are really up to you. They could request information, use information from tables or policies, provide instructions, or link to other job aids to help operators complete a required task. These now include what, who, and how to perform a routine. All stakeholders document their routines based on the USM workflow templates, which are based on the non-redundant process model. This method is the same for all steps and all workflows and can apply whatever practice guidance is needed. So while every organization or service team may have their own specific localization requirements, the logic of each process step stays the same. All right, so here's a quick review. USM enables the enterprise to get in control of its service delivery with a management system of 5 processes and 8 workflows. The USM process model is integral. It includes all service management activities. It's non-redundant. Each activity occurs only once. And it's customer focused. Each process has a customer relevant output. According to the logic of the non-redundant USM process model, 8 workflows represent all service management activities of a service organization. Every organization or service team may have their own specific guidelines for localization, but the logic of each process step stays the same.